While long-term and national municipal policies are required to build a strong foundation for electric mobility, for large-scale adoption of EVs, a supportive financial environment is necessary. Here on this slide, we take a look at who are the stakeholders that need financing in the e-mobility market. A diverse set of stakeholders are engaged in the demand side of the EV market. So borrowers can be classified in 4 main segments with their own financing requirements. First of all, we have vehicle manufacturers and original equipment manufacturers. This group of stakeholders include established legacy manufacturers and several new players with less established credit history. The newer and smaller players need both equity and debt to scale up operations, while the established stakeholders such as OEM and automotive suppliers are rethinking and extending their business models to react to new players entering this market. We also have automobile dealers. These are a mix of new and old dealers diversifying into electric mobility. Dealers generally need debt financing and working capital loans. And then we have charging infrastructure providers. This is a new category of borrowers. They're typically small and medium entrepreneurs. And this group of stakeholders need both equity and debt to scale up their operations. Lastly, we have customers. These are individuals and institutional buyers of electric vehicles, including transport operators, transit agencies, and fleet operators. They're usually sensitive to upfront costs, interest rates, and loan-to-value ratios, and they need debt financing at affordable terms. Getting a picture of landscape of the financial instruments, including financial products and support services available from both public bodies and private investors, can be a daunting task. And one way to do it is through looking at risk profiles. Here, the products and support services have been grouped into 4 categories with common risk characteristics. So market solutions here include debt and hybrid and equity instruments. Investors in the EV space, like those in most emerging tech industries, have to deal with more uncertainties since the market is relatively new. Debt instruments are used for financing companies in the later growth and profitability stages when they have well-tested business models including good balance sheet, generating revenues and reliable cash flows to cover interest and repayments. Hybrid instruments combine both equity and debt characteristics such as mezzanine financing, venture debt, shareholder loans, and preferred equity. For venture capital, this is more common at their early phases, and for private equity, this is more common at their mature phases. So what creates these different risk profiles are the unknowns of e-mobility market. There's limited data for specific EV parameters like battery degradation, resale value, and maintenance costs. Furthermore, there are new segments in the electric mobility value chain, such as charging infrastructure, are still changing and evolving. And this is why, as for the government solutions, they are typically risk-mitigated instruments. These are instruments that aim to help companies grow and access financings through the form of grants and public guarantees. And they're often provided by public bodies at national and regional or sub-regional level. They complement market solutions and allow the companies to grow. A number of public financing instruments are already available and deployed at the national municipal level, aiming to support e-mobility initiatives at various stages of their development. One good example is India's faster adoption and manufacturing of electric vehicle scheme, aka FAME 2 scheme, with a budget of almost $1.4 billion. This was launched in 2019 to ramp up the manufacturing and adoption of electric vehicles as well as charging infrastructure in India. It provides capital subsidy on cost of charging equipment. Despite the increasing support being dedicated to e-mobility, many road transport operators struggle to raise sufficient funding due to the substantial risk and large capital requirements which are typical of e-mobility initiatives. And this is why policies are key to promoting investment in the introduction and scale-up of e-mobility. Now, policy incentives can also create a revenue stream for governments through various instruments which are based on polluters pay principle. One example of such is carbon taxes on fossil fuels. And policymakers can also rely on either push measures, which are non-voluntary and penalizing, or pull measures, which are market-based and voluntary. This is to influence successful adoption of policies. Through EV policies and clean energy programs, the governments can provide fiscal and non-fiscal incentives for purchasing EVs as well as manufacturing and operating charges within their municipality. Because of the upfront cost of electric vehicles that is currently higher than conventional cars, the policy instrument to promote EV uptake that the public pay the most attention to is probably the fiscal incentive. However, there are different types of incentives used to attract prospective EV users. The table on the right side of the presentation provides a good summary of major EV policy incentives. It outlines the 4 basic electric vehicle incentive types, which are income tax credit, vehicle purchase rebate, one-time vehicle tax reduction, and annual vehicle tax reduction, and typical elements of EV incentives. Generally, depending on how each government implements the incentive, the type of the incentive directly determines when the consumer receives the incentive. For example, many one-time vehicle tax reductions are at the point of vehicle sales, while rebates typically are given within several months, and income tax credits tend to be given the year after the purchase when households file taxes. So to complement the government-level solutions such as policy incentives, stakeholders, especially those from middle and low-income countries, can look at international mechanisms to support their e-mobility initiative. This slide presents an overview of the global landscape of development finance for e-mobility. There's national development banks. They provide relatively low-cost capital compared to commercial banks, and also wider range advisory services such as capacity building, programs to small and medium enterprises and large private corporations, also other state-owned enterprises. And these are typically the entities that will need financing that are not best served by the private commercial banks. Countries such as China, Brazil, Ethiopia, South Africa have relied heavily on these state-owned development banks to implement and support government policies by providing financial resources to their key policy areas. Bilateral ones are either independent institutions such as the Netherlands Development Finance Company or part of a larger bilateral development bank such as the German Investment and Development Company, DEG, which is part of the German Development Bank, KfW. Multilateral development banks, they play a prominent role in supporting electric mobility. This is done through their regular transport and energy portfolios as well as climate financing operations. They have been established by more than one country and hence are subject to the international laws. They may have been already incorporated e-mobility into their core lending and operations and also have usually a greater financing capacity than bilateral development banks, with the convening power to act as a forum for cooperation among different governments. More on this through the interviews with 2 of the MDBs, Asian Development Bank and EBRD, have been conducted to talk a little bit more about how to work with them on e-mobility, and this will be followed in a little while. Another important dimension to this landscape for e-mobility financing is global climate finance, which is central to financing e-mobility as well because the sector's contribution to mitigating CO2 emissions through electrification. So the global climate finance architecture can be quite complex and is ever evolving. Basically, funds float across multilateral channels, some within and some outside of the UNFCCC financial mechanism. There is a trend of increasingly more funds spent through bilateral funds as well as through regional and national climate change channels and funds. For the multilateral channels, the Global Environment Facility, GEF, established in 1991, is an operating entity of the financial mechanism of the UNFCCC, serving also for the Paris Agreement. They have a long history of environmental funding. Resources are allocated across multiple focal areas, including climate change. The GEF has prioritized electric mobility as one of their 4 pillars of its climate mitigation portfolio. More on the first global GEF program on e-mobility will be presented right after this slide. Moving on to GCF, Global Climate Fund. Like the GEF, it serves as an operating entity of the financial mechanism of both the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement and receives guidance by UNFCCC Conference of the Parties. As of July 2020, the Green Climate Fund has raised about $10.3 billion equivalent in pledges from 49 countries, regions, and cities. The International Climate Initiative, as of April 2017, this had provided USD 2.7 billion for more than 500 mitigation and adaptation projects. The initiative is funded partly through sale of international tradable emission certificates, providing finance that is largely additional to existing development finance commitments. Together with UK, Denmark, and the EC, Germany also contributes to the NAMA facility, supports nationally appropriate mitigation actions, NAMAs, in developing countries and emerging economies. There is also Global Climate Partnership Fund, which are sponsored by UK, Germany, and Denmark. This is managed by German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, and Nuclear Safety, and KfW, and focus on renewable energy and energy efficiency through public-private partnership. We also have Global Climate Change Alliance Plus, which is one of the largest climate initiatives supported by the EU. For all of the mentioned global climate funds, UN agencies commonly take on the role of administrators and/or intermediary of climate finance, among other entities. Here we have one example of utilizing an available development finance to support e-mobility. SOLUTIONSplus, the project that have created this e-learning course, is implemented in tandem with the Global Electric Mobility Program, which is supported by the Global Environment Facility, GEF. This has been developed by the United Nations Environment Program together with the International Energy Agency, the Asian Development Bank, as well as the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD. The program intends to de-risk the electric vehicle technology through demonstration of technologies, policy development, creation of attractive market environment, and networking and sharing lessons through marketplaces. To date, 29 national projects have joined the program, which are to be implemented by UNDP, UNIDO, UNEP, ADB, EBRD, and DBSA. Together, the GEF Global Program and the EC SOLUTIONSplus project are supporting 42 e-mobility projects in 40 countries with more than $80 million in grants. One of the key features of the program is a marketplace to support financing where countries, cities, and e-mobility suppliers and financiers will come together. On this slide, we hear from a representative from ADB on what ADB is doing around e-mobility and how partners can join them in their efforts towards supporting e-mobility. On this slide, we hear from a representative from EBRD on what EBRD is doing around e-mobility and how partners can work with them to support their e-mobility initiatives.